Something happened this morning that looked so ordinary you may already have forgotten it. You did not react the way you normally do. The trigger came. The thought appeared. The urge to check, chase, explain, control, or demand reassurance showed up exactly where it always does. And for one moment, you did something different. Chosen one, do not rush past that. The most important thing that happened this morning may not have happened outside you at all. The same pressure met a different person. And when the same pressure can no longer produce the same version of you, an old arrangement begins losing its authority. That is what I mean when I tell you heaven is recalibrating. I am not saying God abandoned every other purpose because you had one unusual morning. I am saying something more useful. A life organized around old reactions cannot stay organized in exactly the same way when those reactions stop being predictable. Maybe you did not send the second message. Maybe you did not check whether someone had replied. Maybe you felt fear rise, but you refused to let fear write the next sentence. Maybe you prayed and allowed the answer to remain unfinished instead of forcing certainty before breakfast. The action looked small, but the pattern behind it may have been running for years. Before this message ends, 3 things need to become clear. First, why that tiny choice mattered more than the dramatic sign you have been waiting for. Second, why a sincere person can still become foggy when a real opportunity requires action. Third, how to tell the difference between divine timing and internal noise. Here is the first breakthrough. A new season does not always begin when new circumstances appear. Sometimes it begins when an old circumstance fails to create the old you. Think about this morning. The unanswered message, the uncertain future, the familiar pressure. Did the old trigger receive less of you than it normally receives? If the answer is yes, something has moved. Not everything, not magically, but enough to matter. You proved that the old reaction is no longer the only reaction available to you. Every old cycle depends on one thing. It depends on you responding the way you always have. Most people miss this because they keep looking outside for confirmation. They ask whether the door opened. They ask whether the money moved. They ask whether the person came back. But the deeper question is whether panic still gets to decide what happens next. You may still feel uncertain. You may still have unanswered questions. The old reaction may be gone while the new direction is not completely clear yet. That space can feel empty, but that space is where a new kind of choice becomes possible. There is a reason you can change the response and still feel stuck. There is a reason insight can feel clear in prayer, then disappear when a practical decision arrives. I call that space the receiver gap. Once you understand it, much of what has confused you starts making sense. For now, hold one truth. The morning did not need to look dramatic to matter. The old trigger came looking for the old you, and it did not find the same person waiting. If that is what happened, say this quietly to yourself. I broke the old pattern. What happened this morning has a name. I call it the morning interruption. It is the moment when a familiar trigger arrives, but the familiar response does not complete itself. The pattern reaches for you. You feel it, yet somewhere between the feeling and the action, something new appears. Maybe your hand still reached for the phone. Maybe your mind still built the argument. Maybe your body still prepared for disappointment. None of that means you failed. The interruption is not the absence of an old impulse. It is the moment the impulse stops being your automatic command. You may think this is too small to matter. One morning does not prove that every pattern is healed, but it proves something more useful than perfection. It proves another response is now available. Repeated reactions become familiar pathways. The more often fear is followed by checking, the more natural checking begins to feel. The more often uncertainty is followed by chasing, the more quickly chasing presents itself as the only reasonable option. A reaction can start feeling like identity when it is really repetition. Chosen one, Stop calling every old impulse your true self. An impulse can be familiar without being faithful. A reaction can be practiced without being permanent. And the fact that you felt the old pull this morning does not erase the fact that you gave it less authority. Think about the pattern that has cost you the most peace. When they became distant, did you pursue harder? When money felt uncertain, did your mind predict disaster? When an answer delayed, did you assume God had forgotten you? The common explanation is simple. You tell yourself you are weak. You say you lack discipline. You decide your faith must be broken because you still feel fear. But what if the deeper issue is not weakness? What if your system learned a response so well that repetition started presenting itself as truth? This is where the morning interruption becomes powerful. You are not trying to become a person who never feels fear. You are becoming a person who can feel fear without immediately taking instructions from it. That is a different kind of strength. Be still does not mean become passive. It means there can be a space between what reaches you and what rules you. In that space, discernment becomes possible. You can ask whether the reaction belongs to this moment or to an older wound. And if you are thinking, but it only happened once, hear this carefully. The goal is not to worship one good morning. The goal is to recognize evidence of capacity. If a different response happened once, then the old response is no longer the only response available. That is the first freedom, not a perfect life, not instant proof. Freedom begins when inevitability breaks. The pattern says you will always chase, and one morning you stay. The pattern says fear gets the final word, and one morning fear gets heard without getting obeyed. So name what happened. Do not exaggerate it. Do not minimize it. You experienced an interruption. Every interruption gives you a chance to practice a different future before that future becomes visible. Say this if it feels true. I see the interruption. Because the next question is even more important. If an old pattern has started losing authority, why do certain relationships, habits, and decisions suddenly begin feeling out of place? That is where recalibration begins. Recalibration sounds dramatic until you see how practical it is. It does not begin with thunder. It begins when the old version of you stops supplying the reactions that parts of your life were built around. When that supply changes, the arrangement around it starts changing too. Look first at relationships. Some connections only feel stable when you over-explain, over-give, or keep proving that you will stay. When you stop doing that, the relationship may feel different. That does not mean every person is wrong for you. It means the old dynamic cannot depend on the same version of you. Then look at time. Fear may be taking more of your hours than you realized, checking, replaying, predicting, preparing for conversations that never happen. When the old reaction weakens, time begins returning to you. The day stops being consumed by one unresolved thing. Attention changes next. The old self scans constantly for proof. Who replied? What moved? What changed? What did not? But the new response creates room to notice something else. A useful idea, a practical task, a conversation you have been avoiding. What was invisible under panic can become visible. Then, decisions begin to change. The old self needed proof before peace. The emerging self learns to use peace to evaluate proof. That does not mean every calm feeling is guidance. It means you stop treating urgency as authority just because urgency is loud. This is what heavenly recalibration means here. Not that heaven is rearranging creation around your preferences. It means the life that fit your old reactions may not fit the person learning to respond differently. Picture a future morning. Your phone is still there. The unanswered question is still there. The financial concern has not vanished overnight. But your body does not immediately enter emergency mode, and your first thought is no longer a demand for proof. You breathe, you notice, you choose what deserves your attention before fear chooses for you. From that place, You may see options that were always present, but hard to recognize while your attention was being pulled apart. Now another question opens. What if some of the fog you have, called spiritual distance, has another address as well? What if sincerity is not the problem? What if you can believe and still struggle to turn insight into clear action because the receiver itself is overloaded? Hold that question. We are not reducing faith to the brain. We are not saying every delay comes from your mind. But there is also a layer that spiritual language often leaves unnamed. Researchers have spent decades studying how different parts of the brain cooperate during attention, creativity, and decision-making. Later, I will return to one specific line of research because it offers a useful way to think about why clarity can feel strong in one moment and scattered in the next. For now, notice the sequence. The old reaction weakens, space appears, attention returns, different choices become possible. That is a pattern you can observe in your life. Breaking the old reaction is only half the transition. The other half is understanding why clarity can disappear at the exact moment you need it most. That is the receiver gap. You have already seen the first half of the pattern. The old reaction weakens and space begins to appear. But space alone does not tell you what to do next. Many sincere people become confused here because they assume spiritual readiness and practical clarity should arrive at the same speed. I call this the receiver gap. It is the distance between receiving an insight and being able to hold it long enough to act on it. You can know what matters. Yet when a decision arrives, your attention scatters, and the clear thing suddenly feels uncertain. The first sign is familiar. You feel clear when you are quiet, but confused when action is required. In prayer, the direction seems simple. In the real conversation, your mind starts creating 10 possible outcomes. The insight may not have disappeared. Pressure may have changed the condition of the receiver. The second sign is that good ideas do not stay organized. You see the next step for a moment, then lose the thread. That can feel like laziness, but laziness is not always the best explanation for a mind overloaded by competing signals. The third sign is more personal. You know what you do not want anymore, but your mind still returns to the old route, under stress. You know chasing does not help. You know panic does not create wisdom. Yet, the old pathway still feels faster because it has been practiced for so long. Chosen one. Do not turn that into a character verdict. You are not automatically lazy. You are not automatically weak. And you are not less faithful because your mind becomes noisy under pressure. A learned response can feel spiritual around spiritual questions, but repetition does not make it truth. Here is the hidden mechanism. Insight enters one system, but action requires the whole person. Attention, memory, emotion, expectation, and fear all arrive at the same decision point. When those signals compete, even a sincere person can feel divided while trying to do something simple. Receiving information is not the same as integrating information. Integration is not the same as action either. You can hear the right idea, agree with it, and still fail to move because your internal state makes the next step feel more dangerous than it is. This does not reduce faith to the brain. It does not mean every spiritual struggle has a neurological cause. It means your spiritual life and your physical capacity to focus do not need to be enemies. Both can matter without either one replacing the other. If the skeptic in you asks whether everything is just biology, the answer is no. Prayer is still prayer. Choice is still choice. But the condition in which you receive and evaluate information can affect how clearly you recognize what deserves your attention. So ask yourself something simple. When clarity disappears, what changed first? Did the truth change, or did your state change? Did the direction become false, or did fear make 10 other directions suddenly look equally urgent? This is the receiver gap. It is not proof that you are abandoned. It is a place where insight has arrived, but integration has not caught up yet. Once you can name that gap, you can stop treating confusion as a prophecy about your future. The next question is where discernment becomes essential. Some delays really are outside your control. Some doors are not ready. But some delays are created by noise inside the receiver. If you confuse those two, you can wait for God to remove something that fear keeps rebuilding. Now you can make a distinction that protects both your faith and your judgment. Not every delay means the same thing. Some delays are real limits outside your control. Other delays are created when internal noise keeps turning a simple decision into an emergency. A divine delay, in the language we are using here, is something you cannot force without violating reality. Another person may need time. A door may genuinely be closed. Circumstances may still be forming. You can prepare, pray, and stay attentive, but you cannot manufacture an honest yes from something that is not ready. Internal noise feels different. The opportunity may already be present, but your attention cannot settle around it. You reread the message 10 times. You imagine every possible failure. You ask 5 people what they think, then feel less clear than before. Nothing outside has changed, but the inside keeps producing new reasons to postpone. This is where people confuse waiting with wisdom. Waiting can be wise, but endless analysis is not automatically discernment. Sometimes analysis is fear wearing respectable clothes, because fear knows you are less likely to challenge it when it sounds careful and responsible. Use 3 questions when you feel stuck. First, is this truly unclear, or am I afraid? Do not answer quickly. An unclear situation lacks information. A fearful situation may contain enough information, but your body and mind keep demanding impossible certainty. Second, what fact do I actually have? Separate facts from predictions. They did not reply as a fact. They will never reply as a prediction. The money has not arrived is a fact. Nothing will ever work is a prediction. This one distinction can remove a surprising amount of noise. Third, what would I choose if urgency disappeared for 10 minutes? Not forever. Just 10 minutes. Imagine that nobody is chasing you and nothing must be proven today. What action still looks clean when panic is removed from the room? Notice your body for a moment. Let your jaw soften. Drop your shoulders. Feel whether your stomach is tight. Take one slower breath. Do not treat any sensation as a message from God. Just notice how much information becomes harder to evaluate when your whole system is bracing. Chosen one. Clarity is not always a dramatic feeling. Sometimes clarity is simply the absence of pressure to betray what you already know. It can be quiet. It can feel almost ordinary. That is why people addicted to urgency often miss it. And remember the other side. Some things do require patience. You cannot turn every closed door into a mindset problem. You cannot make another person ready. You cannot force timing. Mature discernment respects what is outside your control while taking responsibility for what happens inside your attention. This is why the phrase, "God said no," can be used too quickly. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is not yet. And sometimes there was never a new answer because fear interrupted you before you completed the action already available to you. The goal is not to blame yourself for every delay. The goal is to stop surrendering your agency where agency still exists. Ask what belongs to God, what belongs to circumstances, what belongs to other people, and what belongs to your own next decision. Say this quietly, if it fits. Clarity before reaction. You may not need another sign. You may need enough inner space to recognize the sign you already received without fear rewriting it. And that brings us back to the question I asked earlier. What if part of the fog you called spiritual distance has another address as well? We can close the loop that has been open since earlier in this message. I asked you to hold one question. What if some of the fog you have called spiritual distance has another address as well? I waited. Because an answer only helps when you understand the problem it answers. You now understand the shape of that problem. An old trigger can lose authority while the mind still carries habits built around urgency. You can know what matters and still lose access to that clarity when fear floods the decision. That is why insight alone does not always create movement. Knowing is one layer, receiving is another, integrating is another, acting is another. When those layers do not cooperate, a person can collect revelation after revelation and still wonder why life feels strangely unchanged. Here is the missing piece. Why does knowing all of this still not automatically produce movement? Why can the insight remain true while the action never arrives? The answer is not that you need more shame. Part of the answer may be the condition in which your mind receives and organizes what matters. Let me make the why plain. You have spent years interpreting every hesitation spiritually. When clarity disappeared, you questioned your calling. When focus collapsed, you questioned your discipline. When fear returned, you questioned whether you had changed at all. But a noisy receiver can make a clear signal harder to use without making the signal false. The old pattern also trained your attention. If uncertainty repeatedly led to checking, then checking became fast. If conflict repeatedly led to over-explaining, then over-explaining became familiar. If delay repeatedly led to catastrophic thinking, then your mind learned to prepare for danger before it learned to evaluate what was actually happening. That is the why. Now the what. The work is not simply to collect more messages. The work is to interrupt the old response and support a clearer condition for attention. One part is spiritual practice. One part is practical behavior. One part can involve understanding the physical system through which attention and decisions happen. It is not a shortcut around character. It is not a promise that every opportunity will work. It is a more grounded question. What helps you become less divided when the moment to choose finally arrives? Now the who. This is for the person who has already spent enough time treating fog as a moral failure. The person who has prayed sincerely, learned deeply, and still notices that pressure can scatter the mind at exactly the wrong moment. The person ready to stop confusing overload with unworthiness. Chosen one, that changes the frame. You are not trying to earn a place in some favored category. You are learning to become responsible for the condition you bring into your own decisions. That is a more mature form of being chosen, because it replaces specialness with stewardship. Earlier, I mentioned that researchers have spent decades studying how different parts of the brain cooperate. There is one specific line of research that became famous enough to receive the Nobel Prize, and it changed how people understood the relationship between the two hemispheres of the brain. That research does not prove spiritual claims. It does not prove that God sends opportunities through a neurological mechanism, but it gives us a useful scientific doorway into a practical question. What happens when the brain works in a more coordinated way? And why might that matter for focus, creativity, and clear action? In the next movement, I am going to show you the research, the people connected to it, and a tool that was built around a whole brain synchronization concept. You will hear what it claims to do, what it does not replace, and why it connects to the receiver gap we have been naming. Before we cross that bridge, remember the contrast. You have spent years asking for a clearer signal. What if part of the work now is becoming a clearer receiver? The mechanism is becoming visible. What remains is how you support the part of you that must recognize the door and choose whether to walk through it. Remember the question about the receiver. This is where the scientific bridge enters. In 1981, Doctor Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize for research involving split brain patients, work that helped clarify how the two hemispheres can process information differently. According to the presentation, the goal is not to make one side of the brain stronger. The idea is better cooperation between both hemispheres. The team describes this as whole brain activation and connects it to clearer thinking, creativity, and more coordinated attention. The presentation tells the story of a woman from California. She described feeling as if life was happening to her while her mind stayed foggy and emotionally drained. According to her account, after using the audio consistently, something began to feel clearer, and the stress became easier to manage. A man from Texas described another version of the problem. He was carrying work, family, and constant responsibility while his focus felt thin. According to the presentation, after using the audio, he described his mind as sharper and said the familiar fog no longer controlled every decision. These are personal accounts, not guarantees. They matter because they describe the same pattern we have been naming. A person can care deeply, work hard, pray sincerely, and still feel as though the receiver is operating below the clarity they remember having. The tool is called the Genius Switch. According to the product file, it was developed under Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York City. It is an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence designed around what the presentation calls neural sync technology and whole brain activation. The routine is simple. Use headphones, close your eyes, relax, and listen for 8 minutes a day. The Genius Switch is not a replacement for prayer. It is not a replacement for discipline. And it should not be treated as proof of any spiritual claim. Its role here is narrower. It is an optional tool for the person who recognizes that mental fog and divided attention are problems they want to address. This is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who is ready to stop treating fog like a moral defect and start treating clarity like something worth supporting. You can be sincere and still need a practical tool. You can be faithful and still admit that attention matters. According to the offer described in the product file, colleagues once framed the value as high as $500. The listed price was $49. The page described in the file offers it for $39, with lifetime access and 4 bonuses. Those bonuses include a guided visualization, a grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, and a printable 5 habits infographic. The seller also describes the offer as backed by an unconditional money-back guarantee, even if you have listened multiple times. Do not act because you fear God will withdraw something from you. Read the details carefully. If clarity is a problem you genuinely recognize, then endless delay is still a decision, but it should be your decision. One warning matters. The product file says the official version is distributed only through the official website, not through generic tracks with a similar name. The direct page in the description and pinned comment is the source referenced by the seller. If this resonates with what you have recognized in yourself, the details are there. Read everything before deciding. The tool does not choose for you. It simply gives you another option for supporting the receiver you bring into your next decision. A tool can support clarity. It cannot choose courage for you. It cannot make a difficult conversation honest. It cannot obey for you. What happens next still belongs to the person God is forming. The deeper current is responsibility. Being chosen does not mean reality bends around you. It means you become responsible for how you meet reality when fear, desire, and uncertainty arrive together. This is the final breakthrough. Recalibration is not reward. It is responsibility. At the beginning, the phrase sounded cosmic. God canceled everything because of you. But the mature meaning is different. Heaven is not orbiting your preferences. What is changing is the pattern that used to organize your life around panic, proving, chasing, and over-explaining. When that pattern loses power, relationships feel different. Decisions feel different. Urgency no longer gets automatic authority. Even silence feels different because unanswered questions no longer become emergencies. This is heavenly recalibration in practical form. The old arrangement depended on predictable reactions. You are becoming less predictable to fear. The future does not have to repeat the same emotional architecture. Picture one ordinary moment ahead. An email arrives, a conversation opens, a decision appears that actually matters. Nobody announces that this is your moment, but something inside you is quiet enough to notice that this deserves your full attention. You do not rush, you do not freeze, you gather the facts. You notice fear without making fear your interpreter. Then you take one clean step because the decision no longer has to fight through the same amount of internal noise. That is the future worth building toward. Not a life without uncertainty, a life where uncertainty no longer owns your behavior, not constant supernatural confirmation. A clearer relationship with attention, responsibility, and the values you believe. And this is where the title changes meaning completely. The old idea says, God changed everything because you are more important than everyone else. The deeper idea says one pattern in your life may have lost the right to organize your future. If the resource described earlier felt relevant to the clarity issue you recognized, the details remain in the description and pinned comment. Read it carefully and decide from clarity, not pressure. Then, return to the larger work. Your next season cannot be outsourced to a tool. It is built through the choices you make. When the old trigger returns, it will return. The question is whether it still receives the same obedience. Say this quietly if it fits. I choose clear obedience. You are not waiting to become someone who never feels fear. You are becoming someone who can hear fear without making it sacred. You are not waiting for perfect certainty. You are learning to move with enough clarity to know which voice does not deserve the final word. Now we return to this morning, not to analyze it again, but to seal the lesson into a response you can carry into the next morning and the one after that. Now return to the moment from this morning. You do not need to make it dramatic. Let it be simple. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. Take one slower breath, and remember the trigger that arrived before the old reaction could fully take over. See that trigger as a familiar door. You know the shape of it. You know what usually happens when it opens. Maybe you chase, maybe you check, maybe you explain, maybe you panic. But this time, imagine yourself standing in front of that same door without stepping through it. You do not have to destroy the door. You only need to remember that a familiar door is not a command. Feel your feet where they are. Notice your breathing. Put one hand over your chest if that feels natural. Do not search your body for a supernatural sign. Notice that you can experience a feeling without giving it authority over your next action. This is the lesson you carry forward. The old trigger may return tomorrow. It may return next week. But your freedom does not depend on never hearing it. Your freedom begins when hearing it no longer guarantees obedience. And now, the primary question can finally close. What changed this morning? Not the whole plan of God, not the laws of reality. What changed was the evidence of who you can be when pressure arrives. The old plan of fear depended on repetition. It depended on you checking again, chasing again, explaining again, abandoning your peace again. This morning, even for one moment, that plan did not receive everything it expected. That is the recalibration. Not special treatment, not cosmic favoritism. A new relationship with your own response. A different condition inside the same uncertainty. A clearer receiver standing where an automatic reaction used to stand. So let these words become your declaration. I do not chase what requires panic. I do not call confusion a command. I can wait without abandoning myself. I can recognize what is mine without forcing what is not. I receive clarity without worshipping certainty. I walk with God without making fear my interpreter. I am no longer the receiver my old life was built around. Chosen one. This is where maturity becomes more powerful than hype. You do not need every morning to feel sacred. You do not need every decision to arrive with a sign. You need enough awareness to notice when an old reaction asks for control, and enough courage to answer differently. There may still be delays. There may still be moments when you do not know what comes next. None of that erases the shift you have already seen. The goal is not certainty. The goal is clearer obedience inside uncertainty. If this message gave language to something you recognized, leave one final declaration. My receiver is becoming clear. Let those words remind you that clarity is something you can support, practice, and protect. And when tomorrow morning comes, do not look first for proof that heaven changed. Look at the person who wakes up. Notice what fear asks for. Notice what peace makes possible. That may be where the recalibration began.